Mother-in-law thought daughter-in-law was a gold digger, but the truth will shock her to the core. This arrogant mother-in-law splashed boiling hot soup right into her daughter-in-law's face, screaming, "There's no place here for penniless hicks from the sticks," and threw her out of the house. She thought she had won, but soon a surprise awaited her. She received a letter that made her turn pale as a ghost. At the same time, she was stunned and froze in shock when she saw what had happened to her apartment. The secret behind this will leave you absolutely stunned. This revenge will completely transform both women's lives forever. And before we continue, write in the comments from which country you're watching the video. And also check if you're subscribed to the channel, as I share interesting life stories with you every day. Okay, let's enjoy the story. Emily stepped off the train, shivering from the cool wind. Her short fur coat, bought on sale last year, seemed completely out of season. But she didn't have another one. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and headed to the bus stop. 20 minutes of jolting along the bumpy road. And there she was, at the entrance to the building where Victoria Harrington, her mother-in-law, lived. As she rode the elevator to the 8th floor, Emily nervously fiddled with the handles of her bag. Visits to her mother-in-law were always a trial for her. Maxwell, her husband, was away on a business trip, and Victoria had insisted that Emily come stay for a couple of days to help around the house. Emily knew her mother-in-law didn't really need any help. She just wanted to test her. The door opened almost immediately after the knock. There stood Victoria Harrington, a tall, stately woman with impeccable hair and a contemptuous gaze. She wore a silk robe and expensive house slippers. "Oh, it's you," Victoria drawled, letting Emily in. "At least take off your coat." Emily silently removed her fur coat and hung it on the hook in the hallway. Her mother-in-law's apartment always amazed her with its grandeur. Expensive furniture, paintings on the walls, crystal chandeliers. It all seemed like something from another life, unattainable and distant. "Well, what are you standing there for?" "Come into the kitchen," Victoria commanded. "I'm just making soup." The kitchen was spacious and bright, with a huge window overlooking the city. On the stove, soup bubbled in a large pot. Victoria stirred it, casting quick glances at Emily. "Maxwell called yesterday," she said without turning around. "He says everything's fine with you two." "Yes, everything's okay," Emily replied quietly. "Okay? Then why do you walk around looking like a drab mouse? No hairstyle, no makeup. Do you even realize you're my son's wife?" Emily felt a lump rising in her throat. She knew it was starting now. Victoria never missed a chance to jab at her, reminding her of her humble origins. "I don't think appearance is the most important thing," Emily murmured. Victoria spun around sharply, drilling her with her eyes. "Oh, it's not important? Then what is? Your backwoods simplicity? Do you even understand that Maxwell could have found a much better match? He's my boy, smart, handsome, full of potential. And you're just..." Emily clenched her fists. She tried to ignore the insults, but it was getting harder each time. "I love Maxwell," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Love? What do you know about love? You married him because he's rich and successful. Don't play innocent." "That's not true," Emily protested, feeling tears stinging her eyes. "Not true? Just look at yourself in the mirror. Who are you? A simple girl from the village, no education, no connections. You think I don't see how you eye my things? How you envy my life?" Emily stayed silent, unsure how to respond. She did admire Victoria's life, but there was no envy in her heart, just a quiet sadness at feeling inadequate in her mother-in-law's eyes. "You think Maxwell will stay with you forever?" Victoria continued, growing more heated. "He'll soon realize you're not his equal. He'll find a worthy woman, and you'll be left with nothing." "Enough," Emily said softly, but her voice trembled. "What? Enough? How dare you talk back to me? You're nobody. A complete zero. You're..." Victoria fell silent, breathing heavily. Fury burned in her eyes. She grabbed the pot of hot soup and, without a word, splashed its contents over Emily. Emily screamed in pain. The scalding liquid burned her face, neck, and clothes. She staggered back, trying to shake off the remnants. "There's no place here for penniless hicks from the sticks," Victoria shouted, glaring at her with hatred. "Get out!" Trembling from the cold and humiliation, Emily turned silently and left the kitchen, She went to the hallway, threw on her fur coat, slipped on her shoes, and walked out of the apartment. In the elevator, she couldn't hold back the tears. They stung her eyes, but she forced herself not to cry. Not now. The humiliation, burning like that soup, demanded not tears, but action. The whole way home, she stared out the window, trying to see in her reflection not a tearful, pitiful girl, but a strong woman capable of standing up for herself. A woman who wouldn't let anyone walk all over her anymore. Suddenly, a thought flashed in her mind, unexpected, bold, insane. But it was this thought that gave her hope. She remembered a conversation with a lawyer, a friend of her father's, about Victoria's financial troubles and her mortgage debts. Emily stopped, pulled out her phone, found the lawyer's number in her contacts, and pressed call. "Hello," came the familiar voice. "Hello, Daniel Ingram," Emily said, trying to sound calm. "It's Emily. I need your help." "I'm listening, Emily." "I want to buy Victoria Harrington's apartment," Emily said firmly. "I know it's up for auction because of the debts. I want to bid on it." There was silence on the other end. "Are you sure, Emily? This is a serious step." "Yes, I'm sure," Emily replied. "I know what I'm doing." "All right," Daniel said. "I'll handle it, but you should understand it's not easy. Auctions are always a risk." "I'm ready to take the risk," Emily answered. "I want that apartment." "Then I'll get started," Daniel said. "I'll contact you as soon as there's news." Emily hung up and felt a wave of determination rising inside her. She was no longer the timid, insecure girl Victoria had humiliated. Now she knew what she wanted, and she would achieve it. A month passed. Victoria lived in her usual routine. Morning coffee, watching the news, phone calls with friends, a light soup for lunch, the same one that had come in handy so inconveniently the day before. After lunch, reading a magazine and a short nap. Nothing foreshadowed the storm. Around 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. Expecting the delivery man with new cosmetics, Victoria critically examined herself in the mirror. Light makeup, neat hairstyle, expensive loungewear. Everything had to be perfect. She opened the door and saw a mail carrier with a thick envelope. "Victoria Harrington?" the mail carrier asked. "Yes, that's me. Sign here, please." Victoria signed mechanically and took the envelope. Back in the apartment, she tossed it on the coffee table and went to the kitchen to put on the kettle. She usually opened such letters right away, but today something inside resisted. Some anxiety, a vague premonition of trouble. The kettle boiled, and Victoria, pouring herself a cup of tea, returned to the living room. She picked up the envelope and examined it closely. It bore the name of the Federal Service for State Registration, Cadastry, and Cartography for the region. Something related to real estate. Frowning, Victoria opened the envelope. Inside were several sheets of paper. She set aside her tea and began reading. At first, she understood nothing. Legal terms, article numbers, references to laws. But then, wading through the bureaucratic jargon, she started to grasp the meaning. It was about her apartment, that it had been put up for auction due to mortgage debts, that the auction had taken place, and that her apartment now had a new owner. Victoria felt her hands go cold. She reread the letter once, then again and again. It couldn't be. This was some mistake, some monstrous absurdity. Yes, there had been delays in payments. Was that enough to lose the apartment? Fragments of phrases, numbers, bank names swirled in her head. But one name stuck out sharply. The new owner, Emily Sarah Harrington. Emily Sarah Harrington. Emily. Her Emily. That same country bumpkin she'd doused with soup. It couldn't be. This simply couldn't be. Victoria tossed the letter on the table and clutched her head. Her heart pounded wildly. Temples throbbed. She stood and began pacing the room nervously, trying to comprehend what was happening. How was this possible? Where did Emily get the money to buy the apartment? She was penniless. Or Maxwell? Could her son have allowed this? But Maxwell had always been on her side, always supported her. He would never let Emily buy her apartment. Victoria grabbed her phone and dialed Maxwell's number. It rang, but no answer. She tried again, silence. Maxwell never turned off his phone, even on trips. Something was wrong. She tried to calm down, force herself to think logically. Maybe it was a scam. Fraudsters forging documents. She should go to the police, to a lawyer. But something inside told her it was all true, that Emily had really bought her apartment. Victoria sank onto the couch and covered her face with her hands. The tears she'd held back for so long streamed down. She cried from resentment, humiliation, fear. She'd lost everything. Her home, her status, her dignity, and all because of her hatred for her daughter-in-law, whom she deemed unworthy of her son. She remembered that evening, her harsh words, the spilled soup, how blind she'd been, how wrong. She'd thought Emily was weak, defenseless, a country girl she could humiliate and insult. But it turned out Emily was strong, determined, capable of desperate acts, a woman who had avenged all the wrongs. But was it revenge or just justice? Victoria didn't know. She only felt her world collapsing, leaving her alone without a home, without money, without support. Suddenly, a thought flashed. What now? Where would she go? Where to live? She had no relatives, no friends to turn to for help. She'd always been alone, relying only on herself. But now she was powerless. Victoria held the notice from the registry with trembling hands, like a time bomb. Numbers, stamps, legal terms, all adding up to one nightmarish verdict. She clung to a straw of hope, calling the bank, praying for a monstrous error. The operator's cold, impassive voice confirmed everything was in order. The mortgage debt existed. Warnings had been ignored, and the apartment was auctioned per the law. Next, a desperate call to the court. After endless transfers, she heard a dry, clerical voice. Checking the data, it confirmed. Yes, the apartment at such and such address was sold at electronic auction. Yes, it's all legal. Yes. New owner, Emily Sarah Harrington. Victoria felt the world blurring around her. How could Emily, that quiet, wordless mouse, pull this off? It didn't fit in her head. She'd always seen her as gray, insignificant, incapable of anything but nodding silently to Maxwell. And now this mouse had taken her apartment, her family nest, her island of stability and confidence in this mad world. Coming to her senses, Victoria frantically pondered. She needed to find out how Emily even knew about her financial troubles. She told no one, only her closest friends, and even then casually as complaints about temporary difficulties. Had one of them blabbed? Or had Emily overheard a phone call somehow? Her thoughts were interrupted by Maxwell's call. Choking back tears, Victoria told him everything, trying to portray herself as a victim of circumstances, not the cause. Maxwell, as always, was terse and promised to sort it out as soon as he returned from his trip. But Victoria sensed even his intervention wouldn't change much. It was too serious, too far gone. Meanwhile, Emily sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea. On the table lay a folder with documents confirming her ownership of Victoria's apartment. Next to it, her phone displayed the name of her lawyer, Daniel Ingram. Daniel was a friend of her late father. When Emily told him about her humiliation and desire for revenge, he didn't dissuade her. On the contrary, he listened carefully and offered his help. It was he who discovered Victoria's serious mortgage issues and proposed a plan. "Emily," he'd said then, "this is your chance. The law is on your side. Victoria got herself into this, and you're just taking the opportunity. Don't feel guilty. You have the right to defend your dignity." Daniel explained how electronic auctions work, helped gather the necessary documents, and provided an experienced broker who bid on her behalf. Everything was completely legal and transparent. Emily had been nervous, of course. She'd never done anything like this before, but Daniel constantly supported and reassured her. "The main thing, Emily," he'd say, "don't give in to emotions. Act coolly and calculatedly. Remember, you're doing this not for revenge, but for justice." Now that it was over, Emily felt not triumph, but rather emptiness. She hadn't wanted to cause Victoria pain, but she saw no other way to protect herself and her dignity. She'd endured humiliation and insults for so long, but her cup of patience had overflowed. She knew Victoria would be furious when she learned the truth. She imagined her screams, accusations, curses, but Emily was ready for it. Victoria paced the apartment like a caged animal. She called every lawyer she knew, begging for help, offering any amount of money. But all of them, after hearing her story, threw up their hands and advised her to accept it. "Victoria," they'd say, If the apartment was sold at auction according to the law, it's practically impossible to challenge. You should have paid the mortgage on time. Victoria knew they were right. She was to blame for what happened. She'd gotten too carried away with her financial games, relied too much on luck. She thought she could wriggle out, that it would all sort itself out somehow. But life had harshly punished her for her carelessness and overconfidence. Now she was left without an apartment, without money, without a future. She understood she'd have to leave her home, her familiar surroundings, her comfort zone. Where would she go? What would she do? Various options flashed in her mind. Ask to stay with Maxwell, but she knew he probably couldn't help. He had his own family, his own problems. Besides, she didn't want to burden him with her troubles. Go to her sister in the countryside? But she'd always despised rural life, considered it boring and wretched. She couldn't imagine living far from the city, without her usual conveniences and entertainments. One possibility remained. Try to negotiate with Emily. Beg her. Ask for forgiveness. Promise to change. But Victoria didn't know if she could swallow her pride and humiliate herself before that country girl. Victoria felt her pride and arrogance melting away. She realized she'd underestimated Emily. She'd made a huge mistake. On the appointed day, Emily arrived. Sunlight filtered through the partially drawn curtains, casting uneven rectangles of light on the floor. Silence hung in the air, broken only by the ticking of the old wall clock. Victoria sat in an armchair, her back to the door, staring at the blurry outlines outside the window. She hadn't slept for several nights. Thoughts buzzed in her head like persistent flies, giving no peace. The registry notice, like a sentence, lay nearby on the table, reminding her of the impending disaster. She heard a soft knock at the door and flinched. Her heart pounded wildly. Victoria knew who it was. It was Emily. She rose slowly, feeling heaviness in her legs. Approaching the door, Victoria tried to gather her thoughts, but her mind was blank. She opened the door. There stood Emily, holding a folder of documents. She looked calm, even detached. No trace of recent humiliation, no hint of gloating. Just a woman here on business. Victoria paled. She'd expected a triumphant victor, but before her stood Emily, as if carved from stone, impenetrable and firm. "Emily," Victoria whispered. Her voice trembled. "Please, can we talk?" Emily entered the apartment silently. She glanced around the familiar setting. Heavy drapes, antique chest, crystal chandelier, all of it, once seeming the pinnacle of prosperity and invincibility, now looked faded and pitiful. Victoria closed the door and, staggering, headed to the living room. She sank onto the couch, her legs buckling. I understand," Victoria began, stammering and struggling for words. "I understand I was unfair to you. Very unfair." Emily stood in the middle of the room, unmoving. She didn't look at Victoria, as if she were an inanimate piece of furniture. "I always thought you weren't like us," Victoria continued. Her voice cracked. "A country bumpkin, a simpleton. I thought you weren't worthy of my son." Her throat went dry, and she swallowed hard. "But I was wrong," she whispered. "I was terribly wrong. You turned out stronger than I thought, much stronger." Victoria raised her tearful eyes to Emily. "Forgive me, Emily," she pleaded. "Forgive me for everything, for all the hurts, all the humiliations, for the soup." Emily finally looked at her. Her gaze was cold and impenetrable. No pity, no sympathy, just calm certainty in her righteousness. "I was blind," Victoria went on, choking on tears. "Blinded by my pride, my prejudice. I thought money solved everything, but it doesn't." She extended a trembling hand toward Emily. "Please, Emily, give me a chance. I promise I'll be different. I'll treat you with respect." Emily remained silent. She stood like a statue, unresponsive to her mother-in-law's pleas. Victoria lowered her hand and turned away. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered. "I'm to blame for everything that happened. But please, think of Maxwell. It'll be so hard for him." Emily pulled the documents from the folder and placed them on the table. Then she laid the keys beside them. "You have 30 days, she said in an even voice. "After that, you must vacate the apartment." Victoria flinched as if struck. "But where will I go?" she whispered. "I have no one." Emily was silent. She wasn't going to console her or offer hope. She was simply stating a fact. Victoria covered her face with her hands and wept. Her shoulders shook convulsively. She felt utterly crushed and helpless. Emily turned and headed for the door. "Emily!" Victoria called after her. "Wait." Emily stopped but didn't turn around. "Why did you do this?" Victoria asked. Her voice was full of despair. "Why didn't you just forgive me?" Emily turned slowly. "You always treated me like a nobody, like a thing you could humiliate and insult. You thought I was weak and defenseless, but I proved otherwise." She paused. "I want you to understand that money isn't the most important thing in life. The main thing is dignity and respect. Respect for yourself and for others." With those words, Emily left the apartment, leaving Victoria in complete solitude. Victoria sat motionless for a long time, listening to Emily's footsteps fading on the stairs. She stared at the documents and keys on the table, and a new feeling stirred in her soul, not fear or despair, but respect. She realized Emily had won not because she now had the apartment, but because she'd preserved her dignity despite all the humiliations and insults. She'd proven she was respected not for money, but for strength of character and the ability to stand up for herself. Victoria rose from the couch and went to the window. She watched Emily exit the building and get into a taxi. There was no longer hatred or contempt in her gaze, only a vague awareness of her mistake and a belated recognition of the strength in this modest, quiet woman she'd underestimated for so long. She knew a hard path lay ahead. She'd have to start over, find work, housing. But now she knew she could manage. If Emily could, so could she. She tore her gaze from the window and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Before her stood not an arrogant lady confident in her superiority, but a humbled woman who had realized her errors. A woman who would have to learn to live anew and value what truly matters. And in that moment, a faint ray of hope dawned in her soul. Hope that she could change and become better. Hope that someday, perhaps, Emily might forgive her. And of course, that would be a whole different story. All right, thanks for listening.